I'm Mrs. Miller, your teacher at ELA Academy. Welcome to part 3 of my series on short answer questions. Today we will look at how to answer questions about symbolism. If you haven't watched the first 2 videos yet, be sure to do so. The first video in particular covers the basics in more detail. Let's do a quick review of the basic answer elements. No matter how simple or complex your response, you should always have the same 3 components. Answer the question, provide evidence from the text, and explain your answer. In the first video, I provided an example of the simplest kind of response, 1 sentence each for the answer, evidence, and explanation. But depending on the question and how much detail you need to provide, you might need to include multiple pieces of evidence and explanation. Our example today comes from Chapter 11 of the novel Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Scan this QR code to access the full text. You can either scroll down to Chapter 11 or hit Control F to do a search for the word cake. You'll want search result number 3. And just in case you aren't familiar with Roman numerals, 11 is XI. The question we'll be answering is, what does the wedding cake in Chapter 11 symbolize? First, a symbol is something that stands for something else. The symbol itself is usually concrete. It's something you can see or touch or otherwise experience with your senses. What it represents is usually abstract. It's something you can't see or touch. It's an idea. So, for example, light symbolizes goodness and truth. But how do we get from the symbol to an understanding of what it symbolizes? Let's go through the analytical process. I like using a T-chart. On the left, we will list all the characteristics of the actual symbol. In this case, what do we know about actual light? We need it in order to see. Enough light can get rid of shadows. We usually associate light with daytime and being awake, though we can also have lights at night. And it can be accompanied by heat, as with the sun. On the right side of the T-chart, we will figure out what the symbol stands for. This side will make up our interpretation of the symbol, what it means. Keep in mind that the left side is concrete, things you can experience with your senses, and the right side is abstract, ideas or things you can't experience with your senses. Let's start with our first characteristic of light, that we need it in order to see. If we aren't talking about literal sight, then what are we talking about? Figurative sight would be understanding or knowledge. Think about what you say when you suddenly understand something. Oh, I see. What about the next one? Light banishes shadows. So if light is understanding, shadows would be the opposite, lack of understanding. That means that light brings out truth. It helps us to see what used to be hidden or disguised in the shadows of secrecy or ignorance. Next, we tend to have the most light in the daytime when people are awake. So, when will you have the light of understanding? When your mind is awake or active. Lazy, sleepy minds will not gain understanding. What about the heat aspect? Understanding is not always comfortable. You might have heard people referring to being in trouble as being in hot water. Students sometimes resist going through this process because they think it's too tedious. They prefer to jump intuitively to what the thing symbolizes. Some people might be able to do that without practicing it this way and still come up with the same amount of detail. But in those cases, they are probably still following this process in their minds just so quickly that they may not realize it. Most people, though, really benefit from slowing down and examining multiple aspects of the symbol in order to gain a richer understanding of it. You especially need this process if you don't automatically understand the symbol, or if you need to write a very in-depth analysis, or if it's such a common symbol that you're struggling to say something original about it. Let's get on with our symbol from Great Expectations then. Step 1 is to read and collect the evidence. Yes, before writing an answer. It's okay to have an idea of what your answer might be, but keep an open mind. The evidence might suggest a stronger or more specific answer to you. Before we look at the excerpt with the wedding cake, let's put it into context. If you aren't familiar with this novel, it's set in England in the 1800s. Miss Havisham is an older lady who has never been married. She's rich and extremely eccentric. She lives by herself except for a young girl she adopted, Estella, and she acts very strangely. Pip is a poor boy who lives with his sister and brother-in-law. All he wants in life is to become a blacksmith. They meet because Miss Havisham wants a boy to come play with Estella. With that context in mind, let's read the excerpt. I crossed the staircase landing and entered the room she indicated. From that room, too, the daylight was completely excluded, and it had an airless smell that was oppressive. A fire had been lately kindled in the damp, old-fashioned grate, and it was more disposed to go out than to burn up, and the reluctant smoke which hung in the room seemed colder than the clearer air, like our own marsh mist. Certain wintry branches of candles on the high chimney-piece faintly lighted the chamber, or it would be more expressive to say, faintly troubled its darkness. It was spacious, and I dare say had once been handsome, but every discernible thing in it was covered with dust and mold and dropping to pieces. The most prominent object was a long table with a tablecloth spread on it, as if a feast had been in preparation when the house and the clocks all stopped together. An epergne or centerpiece of some kind was in the middle of this cloth. It was so heavily overhung with cobwebs that its form was quite undistinguishable. And as I looked along the yellow expanse, out of which I remember its seeming to grow like a black fungus, I saw speckle-legged spiders with blotchy bodies running home to it, and running out from it as if some circumstances of the greatest public importance had just transpired in the spider community. I heard the mice, too, rattling behind the panels, as if the same occurrence were important to their interests. But the black beetles took no notice of the agitation, and groped about the hearth in a ponderous elderly way, as if they were short-sighted and hard of hearing, and not on terms with one another. These crawling things had fascinated my attention, and I was watching them from a distance when Miss Havisham laid a hand upon my shoulder. In her other hand she had a crutch-headed stick on which she leaned, and she looked like the witch of the place. "This," said she, pointing to the long table with her stick, "is where I will be laid when I am dead. They shall come and look at me here," with some vague misgiving that she might get upon the table then and there and die at once, the complete realization of the ghastly waxwork at the fair. I shrank under her touch. "What do you think that is?" she asked me, again pointing with her stick. "That, where those cobwebs are." "I can't guess what it is, ma'am." "It's a great cake. A bride cake. Mine." Now, this is clearly not a normal wedding cake. So in order to understand this really weird and disgusting one, let's look at a normal one for contrast. A normal wedding cake is sweet tasting, beautiful, and ornate. The bride and groom get the first bites, and the guests get to eat some afterward. What do these characteristics symbolize? First, the marriage is an occasion for joy. The union between two people is beautiful because they will always support each other. They go together like cake and icing, and the effort that goes into a good relationship produces something beautiful that's a treat to experience. Who benefits from this marriage? The couple obviously gets benefit from the marriage, but the entire community shares in their happiness. So what about Miss Havisham's cake? How is it different from a normal wedding cake? Let's list all the descriptions from the text that seem relevant. Pause the video and take a moment to read the list. Given all of these descriptions of the wedding cake, what does it look like it symbolizes? Let's start with the first description, that the cake is covered in dust and mold and cobwebs. It symbolizes neglect and old age. It's been kept too long, so that it's now rotting. Perhaps it's some kind of obsession, an inability to let go of the past. What about the fact that it's the table's centerpiece? It's the center of attention in some way. That would also support the idea of it representing an obsession, a thought that is always at the front of someone's mind, something that drives all of the person's actions and goals. Its form is undistinguishable, meaning we have trouble seeing its shape. It's mysterious. This could represent some kind of secrets relating to the obsession. Maybe the obsession itself is secret. It seems to grow from the table like a black fungus. The obsession is malignant, destructive, and unhealthy. It's home to a whole lot of spiders who are running around and spinning all those cobwebs. Perhaps Miss Havisham is actively spinning a web of deceit or some kind of trap. Miss Havisham plans to be laid out on that table when she dies. If she is taking the cake's place, then she is the cake and the cake is her. So the obsession is hers, and it has consumed every part of her being. There's nothing in her life that isn't focused on that obsession. And finally, this was supposed to be Miss Havisham's wedding cake. It looks like the groom might have left her at the very last minute. Whatever trap or web of deceit she's spinning is related to that canceled wedding. Perhaps she wants revenge. All right, now that we've collected and analyzed the evidence, step 2 is to answer the question. What does the wedding cake symbolize? The wedding cake in Chapter 11 symbolizes Miss Havisham's obsession with getting revenge for being left at the altar. Notice, as I pointed out in the first 2 videos, that I've included some of the words from the question in the answer. This helps your reader identify the answer. You might be surprised at how hard some students make it to figure out what their answer is. Now for step 3, explain your answer. Be sure that your explanation makes it clear how the evidence supports your answer. Your reader shouldn't look at your evidence and wonder why in the world you picked that evidence. It's your job to show the connection. Let's see how the answer and our collected evidence and the analysis all fit together. Remember, the answer will be blue, evidence is red, and explanation is green. The wedding cake in Chapter 11 symbolizes Miss Havisham's obsession with getting revenge for being left at the altar. A wedding cake is normally a fresh and delicious way for the community to celebrate the union between a happy couple. But in this case, the cake has been left to rot for years. Everything is covered with dust and mold and dropping to pieces. The entire room, decorated for a wedding that clearly did not happen, has been preserved as some kind of perverse shrine. Miss Havisham seems to be obsessed with the heartbreak of her canceled wedding and is unable to move past it. She seems to identify herself with the cake. When she dies, her dead body will be laid out on the table in the cake's place. The cake seems to grow like a black fungus out of the tablecloth, and it is home to spiders that energetically run in and out of the cake and spin cobwebs around it. Like a fungus, Miss Havisham's obsession has grown into something dark in her heart, and feeding upon that dark obsession, she has begun spinning webs of deceit and destruction. Like the cake, whose form was quite undistinguishable, her goals are mysterious, but it seems clear that she seeks some sort of revenge for her broken heart. See how everything in this paragraph came directly from our T-chart where we analyzed the symbol? The final product might look very complex, but we did it all very step by step. We just collected all the evidence and analyzed one little piece at a time. However complicated this response looks, we still just have the 3 basic answer elements: answer, evidence, and explanation. By the way, if you'd like some help with how to make all of this flow so that each sentence connects logically with the next, be sure to download the handout I made on paragraph flow. Go to elaacademy.us and click on the blog post for Short Answer Basics Part 2 Characterization. I'll include a link in the description below. I hope this has helped you understand how to analyze a symbol and write about it. Be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you can be the first to know when I post more videos that help you with writing and all kinds of other ELA stuff. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest, and check out my blog for downloads and other supplementary materials for each and every video. This is ELA Academy.